Welcome to the Vision and Purpose podcast, where we dive deep into the lives of incredible people who have made a mark on the world. Join us as we explore the journeys, stories, and passions of individuals who have achieved extraordinary feats, shattered barriers, and inspired us all. And now your host, Dr. Sharon H. Porter. Welcome to Vision and Purpose podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sharon H. Porter. I am just so excited to welcome our guest. She is sports journalist and media professional, Ms. Kelsey Nicole Nelson. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much for having me. Honored and delighted to be here with you today. So thank you.
Thank you. And I must say before we get started, you are gracing our cover for the November-December issue. And again, I want to say thank you. Beautiful cover, by the way.
Thank you for having me. No, I'm honestly honored. Like when you guys reached out, I am a person, I always say I'm just a girl from Germantown. So for me, I have the small girl in me, that so many people, I think, doubted for so long. I felt like I was an underdog. So I'm so thankful and appreciative, for every single opportunity to reach people and to get my name out there and honestly, hopefully to inspire someone. So I can't thank you guys enough for thinking my stories enough to grace the cover. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive in because it is as I researched you, I looked at all the things that you're doing a lot.
Too much. Everyone's telling me to slow down.
You are doing a lot in it, but you're doing it beautifully. And that's what I love. And that's what captured me. So we're just going to dive in and try to, find a little more out about you. And I'm really interested in learning about the start of your journey. Like, how were you even inspired to pursue this whole sports journalism and in the media industry?
Yeah, I'll tell you, my story starts, I think, from a young age, but it's honestly inspired by my father. So, I'm a daddy's girl growing up. And my dad was super into sports, growing up here in the DC area. So, if you grew up here, if you have a love of sports, we're so privileged to have all the sports teams here. So I grew up going to University of Maryland games and watching Georgetown Hoyas when it was at an all-time high, Hoya paranoia, wearing the starter jackets, sitting on my dad's shoulders on top when he used to be standing room only at McDonough Arena to watch the Georgetown Hoyas. And, I got my first professional tickets. I used to go to Plum Guard Community Center and they would give free tickets to kids and families. And that's how I got to go to my first professional sporting games, with my family. And so I remember going to Wizards games and we were in the nosebleed seats, but I didn't care because we were there, and I remember watching the screens and hearing the fans and, my mom would go, my dad, and my little sister came, and it was always just good times there. And I love the thrill of the game. I love the way people reacted to the games. I remember looking down below and seeing the broadcasters and saying, one day I'm going to get down there. Wow. And then, also just growing up, I was tall. So, everyone was recruiting me to play different sports. And I was naturally competitive. Like, I think my parents would say, like, I came competitive out the womb. Wow. So naturally fell into sports. I love sports. I played a bunch of sports growing up. I played tennis, Cabin John. I went to Bullis for a volleyball camp. I played basketball. I did soccer, played for the Cavity Busters. A dentist was our sponsor. Back in first grade, I was a Boys and Girls Club kid. So always trying to beat the boys in dodgeball and kickball and everything else, So for me, it's like, it just kind of gravitated towards it. And I think because I come from a family, I come from an HBCU greatness family, I'll say, Black excellence. My dad went to Grambling State University, so I had black and gold in my room very early on and Doug Williams posters very early on. Wow. And then all my aunts went to Jackson State. And so if HBCU sports, the legacy, right, of those schools. And so that's kind of what I was surrounded by. So for me, it was natural to kind of fall into sports. And then naturally people say, I always said to have the gift of gab. And so the journalism part kind of came natural too, just because I love talking to people. I love storytelling. And I was always that person people would tell stuff to. And so I'd have this information and somehow I had to get out. And so I just had the power of the pen, loved writing. I loved poetry. So any way I could get out there, I think I was trying to express myself to be seen and to be heard, as a young child.
I love that. And, you really speak to the importance of exposure at an early age, though. You know what I mean? Because that seed was planted for you then.
Yes.
And, that's amazing. It actually just gave me chills because it really did, because really parents need to know that it does start young. Like, you don't start thinking of what you want to be in middle and high school, that starts very early on. So I love that. I love that. And so on the field, on the court, you are in a predominantly male dominated industry, right? And so surely there have to be challenges that you faced, but you we're interested to know how you overcame them, right? What insights do you have to other
Yeah.
aspiring sports journalists?
Well, I'm a woman of faith. So, I always first believe that God won't give you anything that you can't handle. So for me, like growing up in the church, the Black church, my parents always kind of having me, I feel like I've always kind of had a thick, tough skin. And because I was a natural athlete, because I was, competing with boys early on, for me, it kind of started early. So I was kind of used, to kind of, having men in my face and always like doubting you. So I think for me, it's like the confidence has always been there. But I think for me, I always tell people, like people always say, you do so many things, you work so hard in sports. But I always say, because I've been an underdog my whole life. And I've been told my whole life what I can't do, and not enough people telling me what I can do. And so for me, I just feel like I had that tenacity, and that hunger for more. And of course, yeah, when you're with men, they doubt you. They don't think you know anything about sports. They always try to give you, oh, well, you haven't played football, even though they don't know a girl was an award-winning Black football player
Wow.
back in the day at the Boys and Girls Club. But all that to say, and of course that's a little bit of a joke, but all that to say, it's like, and I've studied this, I've lived this, I know this, right? But it's always like, oh, you don't have enough experience, or you're judged by how you look, and people trying to use that against you. Even though I think how you look is how you present yourself to the world, and your identity is part of your story as a journalist, right? So all of these different things I think people will use against you. And especially I think even another level of that is being a Black woman in sports, right? There's being a woman in sports, but then there's being a Black woman in sports,
Right.
and I think that's very important to see, because I always tell people, like when I first walk into the room, people can automatically say I'm a Black woman. And I love that, right? I love that, because that's the first thing I identify as. But also for some people, they see that as a threat. For some people, they see that as I'm not capable enough to do, what needs to be done. And so I think I kind of walk in with all these expectations of people thinking I'm going to fail. And for me, it's always fighting through that. For me, it's sometimes being the only one, and realizing what I'm doing there is to make sure in the future I'm not the only one. And that not only can I open the door, but the door is going to be off the hinges so everybody can walk through after me. And so I think I'm always kind of thinking of those different things. But you have the misogyny, you have the sexism, you have the racism. Unfortunately, that still exists in sports. But for me, it's fighting and powering through. And that's honestly kind of been my story, and kind of how I've been able to grow through that. But it sucks. It's still there. It's been there. My hope is when I'm an old woman, hopefully by that time, it will be gone. Because the stuff that, you have to deal with, it shouldn't still be there. But I will say, kind of for every male, that's against you, I also have been thankful though to have a lot of male allies as well. Right. So people who will stick up to me, and I have a lot of male mentors, and people that call me their baby sister, or some people I'm their older sister. So I'm also thankful for that part. And men who will call things out too, especially social media. Like you see a lot of the nastiness from men on social media, because everyone's a little bit stronger behind the keyboard when you can't see them. Right. But and
So
you have
true.
people come to bat for you. But I think for me, unfortunately, because all of that's there. But for me, it's more so, how do you power through? How do you keep writing your story? How do you keep advancing to where you want to go? And I'm somebody, I will not be stopped. So, even through that, I will find a way. And if anything, that motivates me more to kind of push and, advance through whatever adversity, whatever trials and tribulations, stand in front of me.
Wow, I love that. And actually, my whole I have a Women Who Lead book series, and the Women Who Lead in
Yeah.
Sports is actually coming out in March. I got to find
So,
out how to get you a part of this because it's wonderful. But that's exactly the stories of the women that's in here. They are, former basketball players, volleyball players, just different
yeah,
sports, coaches, referees, athletic directors.
love it.
And they share that same sentiment, right? And so I think it's so important
Yeah.
for women, especially our young ladies today that are in the trenches right
Yes.
now, to understand exactly what you just said. And there are male allies,
Yes.
and that's what you want. That's what you need.
Right.
That's what we all need.
Right.
So I love that, and you can navigate the challenges, because we do know that challenges still exist for women in
Right.
sports.
Right. One of the best lines I've ever heard was, there's beauty in pain. And that's a
Yes.
deep line for people that don't know that. And what that really
Mm-hmm.
means is you kind of find more out about yourself when you go through adversity. Right. And I think that's what's been kind of the story of my life. I've been able to kind of really find out who I am as a person and as a human being. And of course, that's changed over time. But I'm thankful, because I feel like I truly know who I am. And when you're walking your purpose and your power, and you know who you are, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. And that's
No
completely true.
weapon.
That's
I
kind of
love
how
that.
I feel with everything that comes towards me. So the beauty and the pain and the process of becoming a sports journalist and all the other things that I do, I've learned so much. And I think that's why I'm still here standing,
Wow.
because of the lessons learned.
I love it. I love it. So what would you say is the most memorable or just an exciting moment that you've experienced in your career as a sports journalist?
The first I give, because football was my first love. I had a
Wow.
love for the football field and the game. And, I always say covered my first Super Bowl. So my first Super Bowl was in Atlanta.
Wow.
And, there's nothing like, you're covering games in your hometown, and DMV is my hometown. And it's very special to me. So it's nothing like covering teams here, but, Super Bowl's the granddaddy of them all. Right. And it's my first media row. And if people don't want to talk about media row, is like literally when you have like 1,000 or more media stations all in this one huge room in a convention center. And it's journalists of all types, celebrities of all types, just walking through, and you do interviews like nonstop, almost like 24/7. I think I slept like 4 hours each day, just like little breaks, and then you're back there. So you're up super early. And I met so many people that first Super Bowl, and I also found out a lot of people knew me, which is also a very humbling experience, because sometimes you're working, and you don't realize, what you're doing is touching more people than you directly know. And then being able to cover the game, get credentials from the NFL. And then, like, so be at Super Bowl, you see, tickets are like crazy expensive. So you're like, you're seeing people who paid thousands and thousands of dollars to watch the game. Of course, you're watching the two best teams in the league. So I think for me, Super Bowl was probably the most memorable
Yeah.
experience, because how hard I worked to get there. And when you get to that moment, I feel like I'm a person that always I never really like pat myself on the back or feel like, or relax, because I'm always like thinking of the next thing. But I think my first Super Bowl, I was really like, I took a woosah, and I'm like, I'm
Yes.
here. And I took in the
Wow.
moment. It meant so much for me, always having to watch the game at home and see everything happen. But then to be there and to see it up close and personal, I think Super Bowl for me is like definitely the top experience, that I've had, in my lifetime, because you can't describe it. Like, you have to go to Super
Wow.
Bowl to understand Super Bowl. But like, so just think of football at the highest level.
Wow.
And it's a whole week. You're there a whole week usually. And so much happens. There's parties, media parties, there's so many interviews to get. There's, again, everybody goes down there, like every celebrity's down there, and they're literally like right next to you, and you have access to
Wow.
them interviews. So Super Bowl is probably the most memorable moment of my career.
I love that. I can imagine, and I see why. Absolutely. So, let's talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion in sports
Yeah.
media and journalism. How do you see the industry evolving in this regard?
Yeah, so diversity and inclusion, and it's near and dear to my heart. It's kind of why. So some of the stuff I'm working on now, I'm vice president of the Washington Association of Black Journalists and membership chair. I'm the co-chair of the mentorship committee for the National Association of Black Journalists Task Force. And then I'm on the sports committee for Society of Professional Journalists. So with all these different roles, my main kind of focus and idea is to get more people of diverse backgrounds in media, because media should be reflective of society. Society is diverse. Media should be able to reflect that. And you can't accurately depict and tell all stories unless you have diverse voices. And so I think in some ways we have grown, which I think is exciting. Like in sports media, I do see more women that look like me, on TV, which is a beautiful thing. But then I also think about ways we've regressed. I think about myself here now in DC, and, one of a few Black women that really get an opportunity, to be on air here where people can hear me. And there's so many more, of us. So sports talk radio, I think, is a field that especially we need more Black women. I would dare people to name 5 Black women in sports talk radio that you hear on a daily. And I bet you most people could not. So, it's still a very small minority. It's still largely controlled by white males, and usually older white males, that you're competing with. In sports media too, I think people sometimes focus on what they see and not realizing the executives who make those decisions, there's not enough diversity there. Usually that employer is a white man, who will be hiring you, which I think, is also a downfall. I know one of the things I did this year was challenging myself to cover baseball more. Baseball is another sport we don't see enough Black women, covering the game. If you just watch the World Series, how many Black women did you see covering the game, right? We just celebrated that. So I think, like I said, in ways we have made strides. Like I think in baseball, for instance, we are seeing more Latina women increase, which is a beautiful thing. There are our sisters in the struggle and our sisters in advancement at the same time. But again, I think there's ways that we need to advance. And then also, I think even just getting younger people in, unfortunately, you see media, you see sometimes you see a lot of people recycled. And then when you see older people recycled, who's coming in to kind of fill those roles.
Yeah.
I think we have an issue with getting young people into jobs. It's something I preach to my students. I teach intro to news writing and reporting at George Washington University, actually where I just came from prior to this interview. And, one of the things I'm trying to prepare them for is, life after, and how you're going to get that first media job, because it's harder now. There's less jobs. And people aren't leaving, right? But less jobs are there. So how are these diverse voices going to get in? So I think that's also been an issue and a problem. And I think also we're not creating pipelines, because people sometimes look at, oh, this person was hired, but how long did that person stay there? And that's something I think companies aren't expecting people to ask. And there is a discrepancy with how long employees of color are saying at stations, or, at newspapers, etc. And I think we're also held to a different standard, so all that to say, my mentor, James Brown, said, he talks all the time about, the importance of diversity and inclusion, and it's something that needs to happen. It's a both and. It's not an either or, when it comes to these matters. And so I think a lot in media, again, because the world is so diverse. And, I think for me, again, everything I do, I'm a journalist, I'm trained, I'm objective, but everything I do still is first look through the lens as a Black woman. And there's some people that won't ever understand what it is to look through what I'm looking through as a Black woman, and I mean, honestly, I'm trained, not only am I Black, I did my undergraduate also in African-American studies, so I have that unique lens that I'm looking at the sports through. And I think, unfortunately, like I said, you don't get enough of these voices far too often in sports media, like I said, in front of or behind the camera. So we have made strides, yes. And in certain places, there have been strides. On some national level, there have been strides, but it's not consistent. It's not all over. So I think still we rise, still we push, until today that, newsrooms look like when you guys go outside here in DC, and a world of diversity, exists. And I hope people understand diversity. I don't just mean, what you can see. Mm-hmm. Diversity is so much more. It's not just for Black women. It's for Black queer women. It's for, the Black lesbian woman. It's for the Black male that's gay. It's so many layers. It's for, I do a lot with Special Olympics. It's to make sure people with intellectual disabilities are in that room and represented. Like, I think people kind of get stuck on diversity by what they see, but there's so many other layers to what that need to exist in newsrooms.
And I love that. And so I just want to go back. You talked about, like the baseball, we just finished with World Series, not a lot of women or Black women there. Do you think that stems from the love of the sport? Because I know one of the things that you talked about is you love football, right? And so, so do you think that, as a child, growing up, like, are there Black girls playing softball or baseball? You know what I mean? Do you think that has something to do with it?
Such a great question. And I will tell you, so like for me, I grew up, my daycares where I grew up in Germantown, Clarksburg, Maryland area. The daycares that I went to, I grew up going to Frederick Keys games. And so minor league games, right? And then, I had a chance to see Bowie Bay Sox, so I think luckily here, I grew up having to go to those experiences. And I knew about the Hank Aaron's. My dad was also big into Negro League baseball. So I knew that very early on, so I think what you said earlier is so key, the exposure. And that's why I'm so big on, so one of the boards I sit on is called Tickets for Kids. And what we do at Tickets for Kids is we provide sporting and concert opportunities for kids, nonprofit groups, and families completely free of charge. And these are given by donors, essentially, season ticket holders or somebody that buys a ticket that wants to give up their seat. And I told you how I got to my first professional game. It was a free ticket. So that exposure is so important. I think baseball is interesting, though, because what's happening in baseball, we're seeing less Black Americans play the sport of baseball. And it's dwindling. It's dwindling. Baseball used to be America's pastime. The world likes to go faster now. That's why baseball, you look at the pitch clock and the analytics are trying to speed up the game a bit more, because a lot of people now don't want to be sitting through 9 innings of baseball, because again, people like fast paced, moving, boom, boom, boom. And so I think with less Black Americans playing it, that usually means, and a lot of people go to games to support people they either know, or usually to support people that sometimes look like them. And so when you don't have that connection, I think it's harder to kind of get that exposure, because what's happening right now is baseball is going a lot overseas, which again, is not bad, because you think about sports and wanting to be global, we're getting a lot of guys from Spanish speaking countries essentially here. And you said it, Black women in softball. And really what I push parents for all the time is put your kids in these sports to get scholarships that aren't maybe the most popular sports, because that's really where the money lies, and the lacrosse scholarships and the softball scholarships. I think what you said is exactly right. And I think it's up to us, not just as parents. I don't have any kids, but I take kids to me I'll give tickets to games. How do we get that exposure? How can we bring a Black female softball player into schools to speak? Because seeing is truly believing, right? I mean, for instance, I wanted to be an astronaut at one time, Sharon, because I went to Sally Carrot Elementary School and I thought astronauts were the coolest thing, right? But it was the exposure I had, and they'd bring astronauts in and, it was cool. So I think it's so important to have that. And I think that's a great thing about baseball. Baseball tickets are usually cheaper than other sporting events, which is super nice, especially if you go to a minor league game. You might can go, I think I've seen tickets for like $5, so they're more cost effective and affordable. They have great family deals. So I think it's up to us to make sure that exposure is there. there. But again, baseball is also going to have to do their part. And so I know baseball right now, they're doing a lot to try to get into communities. They're doing a lot to get more into urban centers to reach more people of color, quite frankly, so they can be exposed to it. Hockey's doing the same thing. They have a Hockey's for Everybody program. But again, it takes two to tango. So it's going to take both sides, I think, to really get to that advancement of more Black women, more Black males getting into the sport of baseball early on. And again, if you want to be somebody that breaks into the industry, baseball is a great way to do it because they need that diversity.
I love that. I really do. And so not only am I editor-in-chief of this magazine, but I'm an elementary school principal. So what you're saying is near and dear to my heart. And I partner up with the Commanders and purchase tickets and offer tickets as incentives for different things. Awesome. And so for, I think all of them last year, it was their first professional game. And so you're exactly right. As a community, we have to give that exposure, not only just left to parents, but as a village, wrap around our kids and give them that exposure. So I appreciate that. I really do.
Exactly.
So, let me ask you about Listen In with KNN podcast. Talk to me about your podcast.
This is my baby. And, my podcast has now turned into an LLC podcast network. Talk about manifestation. But I'll tell you, like, my podcast is near and dear to my heart because my podcast is honestly how I feel like I was able to break through in the industry and get people to know my name. Because what was happening is, I went to University of Maryland, College Park for undergrad, graduated with my degree in broadcast journalism, African American studies, did the Rollins undergraduate leadership fellows, public policy program. Like, I was ready for the world. I'm like, I've done this. I had like 15 internships. So on paper, I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm straight. What happened was, after school, when I was applying to jobs, it's like the only places that would say yes were like middle of nowhere places. And so mind you, I grew up here in the DMV. I spent my summers in Jackson, Mississippi. So I know what it is to live in a metropolitan area. Jackson is obviously a little bit slower than here, but still like not rural. And I was like, I just don't see myself in the middle of a small town, not knowing how long I'm going to be there for literally no pay. It just didn't make sense to me. So then I was like, okay, so what can I do to like make myself stand out? That's when I decided to go to grad school, went to Georgetown for grad school. And this herein lies where my podcast kind of started. So, I had a good friend that I was interning with and working with really at Fox Sports Radio named Brian H. Waters. And then I had two good friends, Ray and James, and they went to Georgetown with me. And we had started a podcast called Three's a Crowd Sportscast. So it was me and two guys. Like I said, I'm used to working with men. It was really fun. And I enjoyed it. And I remember I was at a Wizards game and we were doing the post game. And Brian's like, Kelsey, you have so much good stuff to say. Why don't you just start a podcast and say your own stuff? And I'm like, me, like on my own? And I was like, he's like, I'll help you, when you first start. And I was like, okay, I like that. I like a challenge and I want something to break through. And then at the time, I was having a very difficult time getting anybody in DC to hire me, to be on air. And so essentially my podcast was my way of giving myself a voice. Yes. And the funniest thing happened, it's funny how things work. At first I couldn't get a voice. Then all of a sudden I do my first podcast. My first guest is Brian Mitchell. And I had met Brian Mitchell when I was interning at former NBC, when I was there, it was Comcast Sportsnet. Then it became NBC Sports Washington, which is now Monumental Sportsnet. They went through a lot of changes. But I met him back then. He was my first guest. So because I want to do this, I'm going to start with a bang. I'm going to have a bomb guest. Everyone's going to be listening. We're going to be talking about the sport I love. And what happened was people started to look up, who is this girl speaking of Brian Mitchell and knowing her football or knowing her stuff. And then one guest, and luckily because I had been, a member of National Association of Black Journalists and some other groups, and I've always been a networker, so always meeting people, along the way, keeping in contact. I had a whole Rolodex of just really good, celebrity type guests to come on my podcast at first. And what happened was more people started to check me out and look at me and start to tune in. And, essentially my podcast, the whole name was, I wanted people to just listen in with me. Essentially, it's supposed to be listening to the conversation. And then I've kind of been able to brand my name because I remember I did a school project before in class and undergrad, it's Google ourselves and to find what comes up. And I remember, I think I got to page 5 and I finally found myself. And I was like, there's no way in the world I'm going to page 5 on Google ever again. So that's when I was like, I'm going by my full name. People are going to find me on first reference. And of course, now it's cool because I actually think I can be found by my first and last name. But, and my name means something to me, right? It's something my parents named me. And from a young age, people would call me KNN because people always said I was my own news network, like CNN.
I love it.
Right? So it was a play on, so people that know me understand, like it goes way back to just, that. But I was like, I just want people to come listen in with Kelsey Nicole Nelson and just feel like you're part of the show. And that's kind of how my podcast started. It's since expanded. I'm so proud of the growth. I'm about to restart it, which I'm super excited. I'm so busy, but it's my baby. So I'm like, we're bringing it back. We have 2 internship programs. So one for HBCU students, multimedia program. Then I have another digital multimedia program for other college students. So now, it's really great I'm very big into paying forward and giving it back. One of my life mantras is we stand on the shoulders of giants to whom much is given, much is required. Absolutely. And so I feel my podcast has happened to me in that way. In the same way it gave me a voice, now I'm able to give other people a voice. And I've been able to speak to I've had politicians on, I've had celebrities on. I mean, I feel like it's kind of been a who's who, and people just come in and talk with me. And, I talked with Michael Smith for like 2 hours and 30 minutes. And from that conversation, I was able to forge a relationship with him. And he's the one that gave me an opportunity to now be on Peacock TV and NBC Sports with Brother from Another, where people can watch him on a national level. Wow. And it came from my podcast. But then, I've had Jesse Ventura on. I mean, literally. And then one of my big breaks came when I had LeVar Ball on, and the Big Baller brand was at its height. And I mean, he gave me something that other people weren't getting. And I was cited in all these different articles. So again, my podcast, I think for me was really what put me out in the world to be like, we got to look at this girl. Who is this girl? And everybody kind of started to pay attention. So I'm so thankful that essentially I bet on myself. It was a lot of work and it still is a lot of work, but I wouldn't trade it for the world because again, it's my voice. I'm the founder. I'm the host. I'm the executive producer. This is my mic. And then now it's been a blessing to be able to partner with Fox Sports Radio. So to reach even more people, on a bigger level. So I'm just thankful. And that is my podcast is my baby. So it really is my kid. Maybe I have no kids because it's like 5 kids.
Yes.
Handle it. And then my interns have become, my kids. So it's just been great. And it's been so great to go see my interns go on to do so many incredible things in media. So I'm thankful to have that platform.
Goodness. I love it. I love it. And so you're doing all of this, but you still have time to give back, as you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about your project, Books Breaking Borders?
Yeah, so Books Breaking Borders, Books and Educational Bankruptcy. This is also my baby. And I'm so excited because I'm actually in the process now of putting it under, I'm about to launch my KNN Foundation, which I am so excited about. And it's going to be able to touch even more. But how I started Books Breaking Borders, Books and Educational Bankruptcy, I was at the University of Maryland and I was volunteering with the America Reads, America Counts program. And I was actually a math mentor at Templeton Elementary School in PG County. Yes. And what was happening is I remember going in, and I remember going in to talk to these students. They were so full of energy and joy, but I just remember they weren't even able to read the basic instructions, yet alone do some of the work. And it broke my heart because education. So every email, have you ever gotten an email from me from my personal emails? It's my favorite quote from Oprah Winfrey, who's one of my icons and idols. And it's education is the key to unlocking the world, a passport to freedom. Why my parents moved to Montgomery County, Maryland from Jackson, Mississippi was for the education system, for the schools. And obviously I was able to benefit off of that, but not everybody has that ability. And zip code honestly should not dictate your education level. It just should not. And that's only one thing, right? I had to work hard in school. Essentially I was the underdog. I was used to being the one in class, and so it kind of taught me a lot of lessons, but I also know, unfortunately life, it's not fair for a lot of us. And it gives you an unfair playing field for so many of us. And I just wanted to do, my parents, I remember would always say, if you want to change something, do something about it. Don't just sit there. Yeah. And I was in the Rawlings undergraduate program at Maryland, and we had a project to essentially find a problem for the year and create a solution to it. Or essentially find a problem, and then you spend a year creating a solution to it. So I was like, education is a problem. And again, and my background is specifically working with children of color, families of color, Black and brown children. And I wanted to find a way to help them. And so for me, I realized it wasn't just the child that needed to be educated. It was the family a lot of times that need to be educated. Absolutely. It's nothing worse than a child being able to, go home and ask the parent for help when the parents can't help them. Right. And it's not their fault because there's a lot of layers to this, as you know, especially as a principal, but there's there's systematic, inequalities and racism and so many things that are, tied up into our school system. And so essentially I started Books Breaking Borders, and the title is intentional because I thought just the power of a book. And I'm somebody that used to, they used to have reading competitions in school. I used to read. That's one thing I miss now. I have a book next to me right now that I'm going to start reading because I miss reading for fun. But I used to get the Pizza Hut coupons, for reading. I don't know if people remember that Pizza Hut pizza. Okay.
Yes.
But I was able to have had that access. My parents were dropped into life, but not every kid has that. So I thought like being able to be close to a book, and a book is how I learned so many things about the world and about life. And just being able to have access to a book and reading at a basic level, which is the least that a child needs to be able to do. And we all know what starts happening in third grade.
Absolutely.
And how prisons are started to being formed, especially for children look like us. So for me, it was, how do we break into the education system and support teachers, support schools to make sure that children are reading? And that's essentially what this program is. We host literacy nights. We do spelling bees, which are super important. I'm somebody that loved tequila and the bee growing up. And I just thought that was the coolest thing to see a Black girl, win a spelling bee. But, spelling bees, I think people don't realize, doesn't only teach you how to spell, it inserts confidence into you. Like for me, luckily, I was able to do pageants growing up, and it made me really comfortable talking in front of crowds and, really understanding what it is to hone in on a message and get people to resonate with the message. But that's what a spelling bee does. You have to go in front of all these people. Everyone's looking at you, and, it's up to you, and it makes you think quick on your feet. So all those different things that it teaches you, I think it's super important. We collect books, of course, now technology things. So iPads, all these different things that children can use just to be able to easily access. And I think, again, the biggest thing is educating the whole family, because as we see, the best schools are in the best communities, and the best communities have resources pouring into them. So this is just one way to get resources pouring into communities. So as you can see, I'm very passionate about it because education, again, it's so important. I'm someone that's proud to, I'm a forever learner. I feel like I'm even thinking about going back to school now, and people are like, how in the world, Kelsey, you're going to go back to school? Like with all of everything. I still haven't figured out that part yet, but as education, I love it. I love it. It means so much. So definitely check out. I tell
you. Well, you have an open invitation to come to my elementary school.
I love talking to kids. So yes.
Absolutely. It's weird. Prince George's County in Fort Washington, Maryland. And so I extend that invitation to you.
I so appreciate it. And that's what it is, and I've been thankful. I got reached out to a program in Canada about my third, and I'm like, wow, program in the DMV, so you never know who you're touching and reaching. Absolutely. And it's just one way to support education, because there's so much work that needs to be done, but we have to make sure, again, at our basic level, our kids are able to read and to write, because that's every job. You have to at least know how to read, how to write, and how to talk. So that's essentially what it's trying to help and promote.
I love that. I love that. And I got to give my cousin a shout out. He actually went to Maryland. Hopefully you know him, Aaron Wiggins. He's now playing for OKC.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I love that.
Number 21.
Small world.
Yes, it is.
You're the turtle.
That's right. Exactly. Oh, my goodness. You are just amazing, Kelsey. I just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. I want to give you this opportunity to share what's coming up with you. What do you want our listeners to check you out on? Just give us all the information. How can people stay connected with you, follow you, listen to your podcast, everything?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, okay. So I will tell you, I'm a little bit everywhere, but the easiest way to keep up with me is my website, KelseyNicoleNelson.com. I am blessed and thankful. I feel like I have a lot of speaking engagements coming up, which I'm super excited about. One of which, talking about who I am, is with the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington. I'm a Boys and Girls Club. Nice. Boys and Girls Club is family. It's home. So I'm super excited to, be partnering with the team and their program, which means a lot to me. Obviously, lots more sports talk. Washington keeps me busy. So preparing for a lot of TV and radio. So again, follow me on social media to kind of find out where I am, first of all, because I'm everywhere. I think people don't, when you freelance, you literally are everywhere. Work for different companies. And I'll have new shows. Listening with KNN. So follow me on social media, The Real K Nelson. Listen in with KNN. You can check out on Fox Sports Radio, 1340 AM, 96.9 FM, or listen in with KNN.com. I have a brand new team coming on board. So I'm so excited for them. I'm preparing for my spring semester at George Washington University. So closing out this semester right now. So again, I'm a little bit everywhere. I'm doing a bunch with boards and events. But essentially, again, follow my website. It's the easiest way for sports talk, for education. I'm a little bit everywhere. Which I'm thankful for. But yeah, just it's a fun journey. So just come on the ride with me.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, guys. I've had the opportunity to talk with Kelsey Nicole Nelson. She is just, I'll say, sports journalist, media extraordinaire, all of these wonderful things. I just look forward to continue following your journey. And I know greater things are coming your way. So
I so appreciate it. I'm so I don't think anything happens by accident. I feel like we were meant to meet, and thank you for
absolutely,
all you do. I've been in the
absolutely.
classroom, I've been in schools. Not enough goes to our educators and the work. So I thank you. I thank you. And then to be on here with the Divine Nine sister makes me happy. I have to shout out my sorors, of course, Dr.
That's
Sharon.
right. Absolutely, absolutely.
Sister. So shout out to all my fellow Alpha Kappa Alpha women.
I
But
love it.
thank you so much, for
I
having
love
me on
it.
the platform. And I hope people know I'm accessible. One of my biggest things I'll just share really quickly is, when I grew up, I always hated when I felt like people that you meet feel like they're not accessible or like they didn't want to be back in the community. When you said it earlier, I feel like I was raised by by a village. My parents worked a lot growing up, so what I always tell people is I was the first one at my daycares and the last one to leave, which meant a lot of caring adults got to know me and they put me in leadership positions early on. They saw things in me that I didn't see. And for me, that's why as much as I can, I'm in the community because I want people to know like I'm a human, like come talk to me, come be in community and fellowship with me. And I want to truly be there for people because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. So just very big on just being present and being amongst people. So yeah, please reach out to me and let's connect.
I love it. I love it. Guys, Kelsey Nicole Nelson, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us, guys, for another episode of Vision and Purpose Podcast. Please, again, continue to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next week. Talk with you soon. Okay. Thank you for joining another episode of Vision and Purpose Podcast. Please share, like, and subscribe. Please join us every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time.